Welcome to Beyond the Surface. On our podcast, we highlight underrepresented voices in architecture. We'll humanize architects by uncovering who they are beyond the surface. Hi, I'm your host, Alex Sanchez, representing the Illinois Tech student chapter of the National Organization of Minority Architects. This episode is called NOMA Stories from a Purple Spectrum with our guest, June Campbell. June Campbell is a member of the National Organization of Minority Architects Council, NOMAC. She is wife of Wendell Campbell, one of the founders of NOMA, who served as the organization's first president. We are also fortunate to have special guests with us today, Leslie Campbell and Bryan Hudson. Leslie is the daughter of June and Wendell Campbell. While she is not an architect, in the past she worked with her father in his office and has insights into NOMA's founding. Bryan Hudson has been a guest on our show in the past and worked with Wendell Campbell early in his career. Bryan is a licensed architect in the state of Illinois. He is president and founder of SOMA Design Consultants, which is an architecture design and construction management firm. Bryan has served as treasurer for the National Organization of Minority Architects, where he also served as 2017-2018 national president. This is a very special episode for us because this episode completes 2 years of this podcast. We are excited to interview you and learn more about the story about June and your connection to NOMA as well. So let's start with your background. Can you tell us about your background and how you grew up?
Okay, I grew up in a family of four brothers, and I was the only girl. And went to Copernicus School, then to Shoup, then to Holy Name of Mary, Morgan Park, Calumet. That was not a pleasant experience. I was the only obvious black person there when I started, and it wasn't pleasant. There were, of course, all kinds of comments, and I had to be especially careful on the stairs because all of a sudden somebody would just bump me, that kind of thing. So they allowed me to come after the bell rang, and thus I didn't have to worry about what might happen on the stairs. And when I finished at Calumet, and then ultimately I got a master's degree from Northwestern. I was teaching, and then I was elevated to being an officer in the district. Well, we had districts, areas, and then the main office. So ultimately, I wound up in the main office. And I just stayed there until I retired, and that was after 38 years with the system. And I ain't been doing nothing too much since. Then, of course, in between, Wendell and I met, and he was here, and that was a whole nother story because he was not accepted when he applied for admission to the architectural department. But his aunt, she was on a board here, and she raised hell. She said, "You're going to let my nephew in if he qualifies." Well, he had done his first 2 years at Purdue and then wanted to come here because Mies van der Rohe had come over. And, he was, of course, world famous. So she just raised hell around here until they said, okay. And so they let him in. It was a struggle. He ultimately not only was allowed here, but graduated from here, and then went on and finally had his own to do, and went on from there.
So did you move to Chicago or?
I was born here. Now, I was born in 1930.
So what was Chicago like when you were growing up?
Well, you pretty much stayed on your block near your home, and you didn't go anywhere. I mean, I could walk to the corner, both corners, but One corner was like a division between where black people lived and where the white families began. And you were expected to stay on your side. In my case, I couldn't even cross the street and play with any of the other black children that were on that block. I had to stay on my side where my house was. That was that. At the time I was growing up, black women could only be a nurse, work in the post office, or teach school. Those were the only jobs that you could really apply for and hope that they would be positive and all. So I had wanted to teach kindergarten. And that's what I did for a bit until such time as I applied to do things outside of the kindergarten. And that's how I just moved on up the line to the main office downtown.
So what made you want to teach?
You know, I'm not really sure about that. But I used to sit with the children on my block, and we would play school, and I was the teacher. See, a lot of the homes at that time had front porches. I would gather the children on the block on my front stairs, and we would play school.
So when you finally became a teacher, what did it feel like to have your first class?
Well, I liked it, although it was not the best thing at that time because they had just built the projects, and I had 50 children. I had to have the janitor paint a second circle so that all the children could sit on a circle. And fortunately, right outside the window of the room, there was a fence that went along the street. So I could let the children go out for a break from the classroom because there was a fence there. And they knew they were not to go talk with anybody who passed there. And of course, they were not to go over the fence. So that's how they had their outdoor time. Then when Head Start came along, that was an unheard of program. So I volunteered my room to be a part of that. My room and the room next door, which was another kindergarten at the Farron School on 51st and State. And that's where the Head Start program began with us. And it just went on.
I feel like you have this deep connection to teaching
Yeah.
and school. When I asked about your past and what influenced you, the first memory you talked about was school and what it felt like going to school. And it led you to become a teacher. I think that's a very cool connection. Can you tell us about your relationship with Wendell?
Well, in those days, they had streetcars. And I lived, I think it was 4 blocks from the streetcar line. But when I look back on that and think about how we had to walk from the streetcar to my house, therefore, we couldn't stay out too late because, of course, the streetcars were not close together and all. So that did play a part of the whole relationship because it was always walking from the streetcar to my house. So that was something that we had to deal with.
So was it like speed courting? Was it like speed courting or courting on a schedule? Because you had to be there by a certain time?
It wasn't. Because having to deal with the streetcar and walking those 4 blocks from the streetcar home, we couldn't stay out too late. Primarily because we had to deal with the streetcar. And at that time, after 10 o'clock or so, they weren't too close together. So that became an issue. And see, that's another thing. Dating in those days was going to a movie. And unless someone was having a party at their house, it was in the basement with record playing, that kind of thing. And now you know Wendell didn't dance, and neither did I, for that matter. And so we would just stand around and talk, that kind of thing. So we would stand out in the hall and talk. If we had gone out, I met him through another friend that I had. Julius would just come by and we would just talk, and we were just good friends, that kind of thing. And then he brought Wendell to one of those visits, and that's how we met. And then I told my mother that Wendell and I were going to get married. She said, "Oh, no, you can't marry him." And I said, "Well, why not?" "Well, he's in school. And are you going to be the one making the money?" My father didn't care. I said, "Mother, this is not going to go on forever. His program at IIT is 5 years. So he has to complete those." "Oh, no. You don't ever have a situation where you are making the most money and he is in school. Who ever heard of such a thing?" Well, it was unusual. And how will I explain that to other people? I said, "You just tell them like it is." But that's not the way things are. Well, he's not going to be in school forever. And I said, he already has a part-time job. And I've forgotten the name of the company that he was working with at the time. So she just went on about that. She just wasn't happy. So after we got married, it was a question of where we were going to live, because I knew my mother wasn't happy. And where he had been living, that guy, John Ray, found himself another apartment, and we just took over where he had lived with John. And that became our first home, if you could call it that.
So what year did you and Wendell get married?
Oh, Lord, what year did we get married? Seems like we were married forever.
And what did your father do for a living?
My father?
Yeah.
Oh, he worked for the Board of Education as a janitor.
How do you think that influenced your mother's views?
Well, because he was the one working, and she was at home with the family. So that's the way things were at that time. And the whole idea, she'd never heard of anything like that. And so the very idea that I would be doing something so different, she wasn't happy with that.
And how did you feel about the rules? Something so
I didn't care
different
about
for you
those
as
rules and all. So I said, well, if he's going to go into the field that he wants to work with, then he has to complete the program. It's a 5-year program, and if he's going to complete it and become a licensed and legitimate architect, he has to go.
Can you talk about when Wendell started becoming an architect and when he started his own business?
Well, after he graduated, he was already working with a firm, and he just was trying to get himself started and all. And that just took some time, because who was going to hire a black architect? So even though he was trying to have his own business, it was not going to be easy for him to get a firm or to start his own business because it just wasn't done. But he kept on, even though it was small jobs and nothing that was any special, anything, but he persisted in it. And of course, it was my mother saying, "Didn't I tell you so? That's why you have to keep working." Yeah, okay, fine, Mother. Whatever. So that was how we got started.
So, can you tell us about how
NOMA started?
Yes.
He was at the American Institute of Architects annual convention. And there he ran into John Chase, Harold Williams, and when they found each other, I don't know if they went to any sessions. They were so busy with how can we get our own started. Because if we're seeing each other the way we are, and we're all from different parts of the country, we don't know what's out there. So they ain't going to any sessions. I think they spent their whole time talking about how and what to do in order to get NOMA underway. And that's when they decided to have their first meeting in Chicago. And it went on from there. Did I ever tell you what the first number of people were? Was it 10?
I'm thinking about the names.
It couldn't have been too many because, first of all, it was getting back to those people that they knew.
Mm-hmm. Where did you guys meet?
Well, we met in Chicago.
Where in Chicago? Has rabbit ears?
Who?
The Playboy Club?
Is that where we met? I mean, we. Is that where they met?
I think that was the first meeting in Chicago
Oh,
because
yeah,
you had
yeah,
to be a
Playboy.
member. Yep, you had to be a member. So I guess there's a place now in River North. You have to be a member. It's a kind of meeting hub. So basically, it's membership based. You can go in. There's a restaurant. There's a work area, but it's a private club, and so you have to have a key to access it. And so that would be the equivalent of the Playboy Club back in the 70s, where it was Hugh Hefner, but it was a publishing company. It was an after-hours kind of club. A lot of jazz musicians performed there, as well as the Playboy Bunnies. But it was a place where folks wouldn't do business. So they had it, and I'm thinking about the names that I remember, not so much the numbers, but like Charles McAfee.
Oh, yeah. He was from
Wichita,
Kansas?
I think Wichita, Kansas. Then you had Leroy Campbell.
Yes,
out
Leroy
of
Campbell
DC,
from D.C.
whose wife was also named June.
June, right. So there were two of us at that time.
I think William Brown.
Oh, yes.
Out of New Jersey. And then John Chase was there.
Yes. Wasn't Harold there?
Harold and Betty were there. There's a couple of guys from New York. For the time, it was like an all-star lineup of black architects that I had the similar experience when I started the NOMA's chapter at UIC. When the NOMA convention came to Chicago in '94, 30 years ago last year, I saw these black students and other kind of students from around the country. I'm like, where are you guys from? They're like, we have our own NOMA's chapters at Howard, Hampton, New York University, Arizona, US. I'm like, whoa, wait, are you guys? And so it was like that. I was late to the party. But when I got involved, a lot of those folks after school wound up becoming business partners and working on the NOMA board.
How did it feel to be in a room with all these architects from all over the country?
Well, I don't know that I felt any special way other than, ooh, it's wonderful that we can find these people, from all over the states. And we'll have to keep working at it because if we find these fellows, who else is out there that we don't know about? Well, of course, we took those people that we knew were from different areas to find more people for us and tell them about what was beginning to take place. And so that's how we kept on going. We'd have meetings and ask people to come for the few days because it was a weekend kind of thing. So that was that. Well, I like this and I don't like this. They would not, at that time, take in any women. So then when we had to say NOMA has to be, when it says minority, are you going to include women? And that was when things started going in different directions. See, we had more white women to come into the picture. And legitimately, if you're going to, well, you all call yourselves minority, what are women? So what could we do?
And what role did the wives play in NOMA?
They didn't at that time
Okay.
because the only architects we knew of were males. And just trying to find the black guys was a job in itself.
The other thing to take into consideration with the wives is they were big in logistics. So when it came to the Bahamas trip,
Oh,
the wives put that trip together.
yep.
That was the first official meeting after they got together in Detroit. And that happened in November of 71.
I can't remember.
I think it was towards the end of the year because they were excited about it. And
Yeah.
what led to the Chicago meeting was a lot of folks couldn't
That's
make
right,
it in
I
time.
forgot about that one down in the Bahamas.
They couldn't make it because it was such short notice, and you talking like early 70s. There are no computers. You have to call a travel agent to go to a ticket counter and buy a ticket. So probably doing those phone trees where you call somebody, they call somebody, and they call somebody. You talking New York, D.C., Chicago, L.A., Houston, Cleveland, and getting everybody
California.
together and then finding the place to stay in the Bahamas, the plane tickets.
Yes, all of that.
It was a whole thing. And we actually got a chance to celebrate 50 years of that a few years ago. We got to go back to the scene of the crime. But that was the impetus for the Chicago meeting when everybody else could plug in, because it's like, well, it's too short a notice. I don't have time to change this, but keep me posted. And so Bob Coles,
Oh, yeah, yes.
out of Buffalo, New York, Harry Overstreet out of San Francisco, Oakland area.
Well, see, you remember all those names. I'm terrible with names.
I had to do the research because we did a book for NOMA's 50th.
So what were some of the challenges you faced when you became more involved with many architects, even though that wasn't your original background?
Either referring them to somebody else or I'd send them to Wendell. And I didn't know what they were talking about other than it had something to do with architecture, but other than that.
Okay.
Well, I think one of the things that you enjoyed in the lead up to NOMA's formation, as well as, like once NOMA was up and going, is, as a wife of business owner, but especially, an architect, where it is not an easy profession. You didn't get to see Daddy very often because he was working pretty much all the time, and he had the offices both in Chicago and
Yeah, but I had to ask him to give us the weekend so that his children could figure out who he is.
Yeah, so we would have Sundays because Saturday he would be working too. So my point is that it was it is kind of an isolating experience in that you understood all of the challenges that he was facing, but you had no one to really talk about how that impacted you or just kind of share your experience until you met some of these other women. Because now you had a shared experience because they experienced the same thing. And I think that was an aspect of NOMA's formation that is not necessarily recognized, but that it did give the wives an
A chance
opport-
to meet too.
yeah, and to have points of common.
So, what was it like meeting some of the other wives of the architects?
Oh, we would all commiserate over the same kind of things. The hours that they were away from home, the days, and particularly since if they had children, when do they ever see you or talk with you? If you're not there at dinner time, you're not there at bedtime most of the time. So, come on, let's figure out what we're going to do here and how we're going to do it. So your family doesn't feel like you are a stranger to them.
Can you talk about the time period NOMA was founded in and how that impacted the organization?
Phone, honey, phone. We were on the phone all the time, either to understand how each other reacted to the hours that their husbands were away from home, what kind of projects they were involved in. So, it was just trying to stay in touch with them so we would have some kind of contact of what was going on.
And then I guess the other part of that question is, how was it, what did it feel like starting this organization in the middle of the civil rights or towards the tail end of the civil rights movement? Because this is after several assassinations, Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, Robert Kennedy.
Yeah, but we also felt like because the organization was growing, that there had to be some way that we could be in touch with other people. And basically, it was the wives of the architects that we felt like we should have some kind of group where we could be a part of what you all were doing, because you always came home so late and you were gone practically 7 days of the week. So what were we going to do? First of all, we had to get to know each other.
So, being involved with NOMA meant being more connected also.
Yeah, oh, definitely. Even though we knew that in each case their husbands had different hours, projects, traveling, all that kind of stuff. But still, that didn't keep us as women and partners, in a sense, from being in touch with each other, because we weren't running around like that.
Well, I think, too, to your point, Brian, that was maybe part of the dynamic, too, was that in the absence of there being a NOMA at all, there was clearly the AIA and what it represents.
Yeah,
they were
but-
marching ahead.
Yeah.
But they weren't marching ahead in any sort of truly inclusive way other than maybe handing out a fellowship here or there. But other than that, structurally, there was no change. And yet, yeah, you are coming out of this period where clearly the rest of the country, there are definite shifts, whether they were successful or not. There was some sort of reaction, there was some sort of forward movement. But in this space, in the architectural space, there is none. And so I think that there had to be a NOMA because there had to be some way to at least try to address that stagnation. And also the isolation of having to always, basically do it alone, which is
Yeah.
what they were having to face prior to NOMA's formation.
And I think the Whitney Young speech in 1968 at the AI convention, where several of our council members were in attendance as students, also helped move forward the idea of NOMA. So it was almost like a perfect storm. And they were at the center of it when they finally met up in Detroit to start having those conversations to make it become a reality. So she goes back to the communication and the telephone because at that time, other than snail mail, that was the fastest way to get a result. So technology is always changing, it's always evolving, but I guess they were the precursor to Facebook. It's like, I'm gonna find a friend and we're going to stay connected.
How did it feel to start to see NOMA grow over the years?
It was always like, woo, look what's happening here. Because, see, when I think now, it started with 3 men, and where our membership-wise?
Well over 3,000.
That's what I'm saying. You know, woo. I just keep saying that, you know, because I just think of those 3 men talking. And, of course, they turned around to us to get it going, but, you know, they won't say that.
Yeah.
But anyhow, that became very apparent that, well, wait a minute, we're from 3 different areas. Who the heck? Where else are there people that we don't even know about? And so that's when the guys first decided on that first meeting.
And listening to you, I'm thinking, because to your point about technology and how the technology is so different, and there, you know, obviously there are upsides and downsides to some of that stuff. The upside, finding people's numbers,
Yeah.
that was, you know, the old way was great.
Yeah.
Now it's harder. But these guys were really resourceful. They had to be. And so if the OGs, so to speak, if they were here now, like in a new form or whatever, but had access to the technology that we have now and social media and with like the ways that the people are able to communicate and get your message out. And also understanding, because I think sometimes as organizations progress, the complexities, you know, of having more members and the relationships between those various members and, you know, what is the ethos of the organization, all that can get kind of complicated.
And it has.
And yeah, and so it would be interesting to see how they might address that now with 2025 understanding. Because, yeah, back then they weren't thinking about women at all, even though a lot of them had daughters, some of whom, like my sister, is like an architect herself, right? But now, if they could kind of come back and be aware now, might be very different. It might have a way of like kind of cutting through the noise because they understood so clearly why they needed to come together to begin with. And there were differences. I mean, they didn't agree on stuff.
Yeah.
And so, you know, like having to navigate the egos and the turfs and all that kind of stuff is not much different than what the dynamics that go on now, because you bring in different people who all have different perspectives. And it's really about trying to understand how do you serve the perspectives while still appreciating the organism and the value of the organism itself. And I think they would be, I hadn't thought about that, but like thinking of my dad, he'd be so proud. He'd be so just really gratified to see how NOMA has grown. But he'd also be really frustrated by the congestion. And he'd be like, okay, yeah, no, we got to figure out how to work through some of this.
Yeah. And sadly, we find ourselves today right back where we were 53, 54 years ago
How so?
because of things that are taking place in Washington, D.C. right now. Rolling back all the policies for civil rights, everything that we fought to get, or I was born in 68, so I wasn't fighting, I was fighting to get here. But all the battles that we fought as a people in the last 70 years, they're trying to take all that away. And that was part of the reason why NOMA was created. And now we're back looking at it all over again. How did we get back here? And what do we do about it? Leon Bridges is still pretty vocal and active as one of the original OGs out of Baltimore. I think he's 94 now, but he's still pretty active. He didn't get a chance to come out to the conference because he wasn't feeling that great. But even having conversations with him, it's interesting. As much as things have changed, they kind of are the same again. So being able to get his input on that would be really, really interesting about the madness that we're dealing with as it relates to being architects in this time again.
Since we're talking about civil rights and what it looked like before, what was your experience like living through the civil rights era? You mentioned earlier about how it felt going to school when you were little and teaching and the growth of NOMA during the entire movement.
Well, if we wanted to do anything different, then we had to put forth the effort, first of all, to see what kind of response that we would get. Otherwise, we just keep doing the same thing. And that wasn't any, we're tired of that. So, trying to do something that was not done at that time was a real challenge. Now, that could be any number of things, not only on your job, but in the neighborhood, what you allowed your children to do. I mean, all kinds of things, whatever.
I don't think you or Daddy, you didn't really live your lives, how to put this, you're always aware of the racial context and what was going on civil rights-wise. But it wasn't like, for you, it was different for Daddy, but for you, that wasn't like your driving impetus. Like you went on with your life, you saw things, if there was an opportunity at the Board of Ed that you wanted, you just went for it.
Yeah.
And then if there was some racial element that was tied to it, then you would figure out how to work around it. I think it was more like, okay, well, this is the way it is, so let me just see if this is what I want, then how do I work a way around to get it? They were very problem-solving oriented in it. And I think the difference between your generation and our generation is that those of us post-civil rights came along with certain rights expectations. They didn't have those same expectations, although they thought that they deserved those things. So the way in which they approached everything was different. And so even with my father, he used to talk about how one of the things he would often say is, I'm a minority by their definition, not mine. And that really infused the way he looked at things, because he was always fighting the system, but yet he was one of the few architects. At one point, he had close to 30 people working for his firm, and they're from all around the world, all walks of life, all races. I used to call his office the little UN, because we literally had everybody. And, when you think about it from the other side of that, it takes certain types of people, white European men, to work for a black man. Mm-hmm. So, that told me, and I think my dad, it was a real testament to him, is that he saw the world for its possibilities, how it could be. And I think he saw in NOMA, he was kind of wanting to go in that vein too, and that he saw the possibilities of what could happen when you get people together. And then you work out all the other stuff along the way. But he was very clear about the system. The problem is the system, and that the system makes people's minds, perspectives a certain way. And I think sometimes we forget, we conflate the two. And I mean, if he was here now, he'd be very disappointed to see what's happening. But he'd also be okay, well, they've forgotten. We're back in the time frame where the problem is, at the end of the day, how are you going to deal with the system? And so, one of the things that NOMA was supposed to help is, in that time in the early 70s, especially if you wanted any government work, it was all done through affirmative action, through set-asides, which was necessary because you couldn't get those contracts otherwise. But once you got in, and if you had a certain level of success, it became the glass ceiling. Because if you did your job really well on one of those set-aside contracts, if you came in as those firms, they don't want you as the main, even though you could do the main job if you were big enough to do that. But now they lose someone that they've gotten really used to working with. So then you become, that's where the competitive side comes in, because now you're competing against other firms that are all caught in the same kind of net, because they're all being defined as only being able to do this type of work, because this is how the contracts are set up. So that's where it's he appreciated that they needed that step, but now it was the challenge was, how do we break this mold? Because it's always about getting out of a mold. So I guess what I'm saying, when you talk about the civil rights, he and that whole generation, I think, were really unique in that they lived it. They, set the precedent for what came afterwards, for the freedom that our generations have been able to have compared to theirs. But they kept their eye on the ball, like what the real issue is here, than I think sometimes we do, because we've kind of forgotten in all of the relative victories that we've had. That's like, okay, but they changed, but they didn't change that much. They understood that. I think we're now learning that.
Yeah.
The times are definitely different. I like a lot of the things you said, especially with before they worked around the system versus now we expect it. It's like we expect our rights. And I mean, that's not a bad thing. I mean, we deserve them. But it's a different type of strategy that we're using to get around these rules that are being assigned to us. So, June, now that you're on the NOMA Council and you attend these conferences, how does it feel to see the way NOMA has grown when you were there from the beginning?
I'm glad that I have been around so that I can see where we came from and where we are and what we're trying to do, which was unheard of at the beginning. We were just trying to get together. But it's amazing how far the organization has gone and what they continue to do. Not just accept what is, but continue to work on what still is not and find various ways to do it, because they are a group of people that don't just accept stuff, and that's very good, because what they got to lose? Where we were always keeping in mind, if we do this, then this will happen, and all this kind of stuff. They don't care, and I'm happy to see it, even though I could never do it. But I'm glad there is a group that feels that they can do it, and nobody can stop them.
And I think that goes back to what you were saying, how it's like we feel like we deserve these rights. We feel like we will fight for them because of it. It won't be the same necessarily as when the civil rights movement came or was here. And to your point, I think NOMA means so much to many people.
Yeah.
For me, I'm the first one in my family to get into college.
Okay.
So finding a community of people of color was like really important to me when I came to college. So when I first found out about NOMA, I immediately got involved. And I've worked my way up as a student to be able to be president of the student version for IIT. But I think what struck me the hardest is when I went to my first conference and I saw all these people from all around the world all assembled in one place. And I know Bryan has a similar story where just seeing all these students of color just all assembled in one place and all the professionals. As someone who's never had any connection to college or seen anyone really succeed when it comes to college, it just made everything more possible. It made everybody feel like my dream can actually happen. And I think that, and I can't speak for everybody, but I know that NOMA has a really deep connection to many students and professionals of color, especially who grew up in NOMA. And Bryan, could you talk about your experience with NOMA and how that connects to you deeply?
So, my connection with NOMA starts, one, with my dad. So, he wanted to be an architect. Funny thing is, he and Wendell are about the same age, I think. My dad was born in 27. Wendell was born in 26.
27. Mm-hmm.
So, same age, different backgrounds, both served in the Army. But my dad fell in love after he got done with high school, met my mom, and started the family. So college wasn't an option because they got 3, 4 kids. It's like, nope, we're gonna do it. But I liked to draw as a kid, so he took that and ran with it. So he's like, you gonna be an architect? I was like, okay, what's architect? He explained it to me, and there you go. And so, unfortunately, I had a stroke my senior year in high school. So I didn't get a chance to go away to college. I wound up at Loop College, which is now Harold Washington. And I wasn't the greatest high school student for different reasons, but I excelled in my drafting class, straight A's. And so when I got to Harold Washington, because my mom wanted me to go to college. All 6 kids, I'm the last of 6, you had to go to school. And so I got accepted to IIT. I didn't get accepted to UIC or U of I, but IIT accepted me on my ACT scores. But at the time, I think it was $10,000 a semester. And my mom was like, you know what? You didn't do that good in high school. I'm not about to waste this money. So I was sent me to junior college. And I was like, I'll show you. I was on honors for all 3 years I was in junior college. I actually went there twice, but the second time when I came back, one of my professors had told me NOMA, which is the Illinois chapter for NOMA, was having a portfolio workshop event at UIC, and that I should reach out to them to see about transferring to UIC School of Architecture. And at that time, I went to the event and I met Billy McGee. And Billy McGee was like, oh, so you want to do this? Like, I'll help you out. So come by my office. Because at that time, Billy worked for Wendell Campbell. And so he's like, yeah, this is the address. It's 1326 South Michigan?
Yeah.
1326. It's like, come to the second floor and ask for me, and I'll come out and I'll help you. So the funny thing is, coming from a junior college, the architectural vernacular is completely different. It's more technical. So when I'm thinking about a portfolio, 24 by 36 drawing case with big drawings. It's like a portfolio is something that's condensed, smaller, concise to show your work. So I had no clue. So I walked into the office with this drawing board, and I see this guy sitting in the lobby, kind of laid back on the couch, and shoes off. He's just like, just kind of, just humming to himself. Da, 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 da. What the heck is this? And so I walk in, and there's a young lady sitting at the receptionist desk. I'm like, yeah, I'm here to see Billy McGee. It's like, okay. And so I look over at the man, and I'm like, she's like, hey, how you doing, young man? I was like, I'm good. I'm here to see Billy. He's like, oh, really? Okay. I can't remember what came up, but I asked him, so who are you? He's like, I own the firm. He's like, well, what's the name of the firm? And he pointed to the initials on the wall. I was like, oh. So this is my first time. I think I was 24 at the time. It's my first time meeting two licensed black architects, but the first time meeting the firm owner. And from that initial meeting, he was like, you know what, young man? Anytime you want to come here, it's open door policy. You could just tell the receptionist who you're looking for, and you can just go back in the drafting room and talk to whoever you need to talk to. And majority firms, you go through security, you may not even get, it's no. But Wendell provided that there's an open door policy that I practice at both of my firms today. It's like, if I'm here, come see me. If you need to see somebody, call, come by. But that started a long relationship with me and Mr. Campbell coming by after start the NOMA chapter at UIC, bringing the students in for office tours, job shadowing, sometimes sitting in on some of the meetings that they had, just getting acclimated to the point that when I graduated in 97, he was already thinking about wanting to hire, because a lot of black kids in the city and some from out of state, that was like their first landing spot. That was like the first job they had. And so although when I graduated, I wasn't looking for a job because I wanted to enjoy my last summer of freedom, because I know after that, it's a wrap. You're going to be working, you're going to be studying. So I wound up working. I had to get a job anyway because I was going to be in my best friend's wedding in Jamaica, so I need to pay for it. So I worked for Bill Braisley, who's another former local Chicago architect. And then the end of the summer, I get laid off. Mr. Campbell called me that morning. It was a Friday. He called me that morning, was asking about one of my classmates that was looking for a job. He was like, I'm on an interview. Can you tell me about it? I was like, sure. That afternoon, I called Mr. Campbell back. I was like, Mr. Campbell, I don't know what to tell you, but is that job still open? And he was like, well, actually, there are two positions. Can you come in and interview tomorrow? Sure. And so show up the next day, 12 o'clock, Saturday, 1326, which is unofficial office hours. He interviewed me for a position to work out at Midway Airport doing a noise abatement program. And at the time, I had dreadlocks. And he asked one question. He's like, would you be interested or willing to cut your hair, because I'm going to be working with a majority white population. At this time, the majority of the community around Midway Airport was Polish, first descendant to the country. And so you still talk about civil rights and the unease of working around black folks. And I was like, well, I got a car note, I got rent to pay, I need this job. Okay, Ms. Campbell, if we get any complaints or any issues, I'll cut my hair. That was 27 years ago. Yeah, 27 years ago. I haven't cut my hair yet. Mm-hmm. And so, matter of fact, I got a lot of compliments from the clients in the community about the work that I was doing. And that was something that Wendell, he loved it because I was an extension of the firm. And so he trusted me to go out, carry his brand, and deliver the level of service that he provided across the state. So getting the opportunity to serve on the national board, it happened one day at the office, get a phone call from a president down in Miami. And he was like, I got your name from Dina Griffith. Want to know if you'd be interested in becoming a university liaison for the Midwest on the national board. And so I took the call in Wendell's office, and he's like, are you interested? And Ms. Campbell was like, yeah, he's interested. And at the time, Susan, his daughter, was the Midwest vice president. So that was the first role that I had on the national board. And then we had our conference in Fort Lauderdale just a few years later. And I happened to rent a car. And so at the time, there was a project in the office. It was the secret project where he was looking to develop a high-rise where the courthouse is across the parking lot. So that might have been like 1430 or 1434. And so one of the property owners was a retired World War II vet, former engineer, retired, living in Boca Raton. And Wendell asked me if I'd be willing to take him to his meeting to meet with the owner to discuss acquiring that corner lot to help secure the funds and the property to build this high rise. And I was like, sure, Mr. Campbell. So I took him to the meeting. It was a good meeting. We come back, go back to the conference. The next day, it's the general session, the general body meeting. And so at the time, we were changing management companies. The current president, Kim Martin, was like, oh, you got a car? I need you to take me to the bank. So we had to go to the bank to handle some financial transactions. When I get back, I pull up, park the truck, and the meeting's going on. And Mr. Campbell's like, hey, actually Drake, who was the incoming president, was like, hey, there's a position as treasurer open. And Mr. Campbell's like, you gonna do it, right? So I was voluntold to be the treasurer. It was more of that initial meeting with Wendell in his office, even before I got into architecture school, that you talk about seeing the vision, having the vision, seeing the future, that he saw enough in me to put me in several positions of leadership. I'm sure he would have been singing Nature Boy at my inauguration when I took the ceremonial staff in Los Angeles, because that was what he set me up to be. So that's my commitment to the organization. The first president or the original founders, the first black firm owner I met, put me on the path to do what I do in memory and service to his legacy, and to continue that same legacy with young folks like yourself and the folks that work in my office.
I think that's a very inspirational story because it's going back to what NOMA means to the different people that are part of NOMA, and the legacy of Wendell and what that meant for you and how that grew you. And you went from the first president and he invested his time into you, and then you ended up becoming a president. And I'm sure that you'll probably be investing into another future president in the future.
The last 5 presidents. So Kimberly Dowdell, Jason Pugh,
Yep.
Pascal Sublime are all of my mentees. I met all of them as students and put all of them in a position to, well, except Pascal. Pascal already knew she wanted to do great things, but I was her sounding board. And same with Brian. Brian came to me as a student when he was at Ohio State. The Ohio State. But they all sought me out at different points, and look at them all now. So I'm just paying it forward, because Billy and Wendell invested in me. It's not just architecture, it's not just a career, but it's also the family aspect that you don't really get in AIA. AIA is definitely business, corporate. You can make friends, you can make ties, but that's the difference between the two organizations. It's familial. This is my adopted mother.
How do you feel about seeing Bryan develop over the years?
I remember when you first came in, when you were talking about like the office, like when you walked in the lobby. Before you said, I was like, oh yeah, Daddy was probably there, sitting like how he does without his shoes. Was he walking around without his shoes that day? Whatever. But yeah, I mean, you've known Bryan for a long time.
A long time. Yeah.
So how has it been watching
it's
him?
always good to see people that you know develop and what they become and how they have done it and how they are continuing to do it. So if anything, I may talk about his beard and talk about whatever he's wearing. I ain't gonna talk about him in terms of his skills or his ability. So what is there for me to do other than say he's qualified?
My father would be, I mean, it's interesting to watch the progression of people over that you've known. That was another thing that was really kind of interesting. A lot of these names. I mean, I remember June Campbell, the other June Campbell, when I was looking at schools, doing like the pre-college tour. I stayed with them in D.C. And because of the relationship that you developed with June Campbell through NOMA, 'cause you didn't even go on that trip.
No.
I mean, so for you to send me to stay with her and for something that was that important, was just kind of a testimony to the relationships. You talked about the relationships that developed. And at that point, I mean, that was 79, so you probably only knew her at that point for maybe 6 years. But my father was it makes sense when you figure that he was very much someone aware of there was something that he knew would be helpful to him at a certain stage that wasn't provided, and he was in a position to provide it, he was going to provide it. And he had the same outlook about NOMA, that the mission should be both helping organizations at the state that they were, development-wise, but that you always had to be looking beyond that. So, because all organizations are fundamentally about people. So my father was very, very adamant that NOMA needed to be a resource that was always going to be tapping into and developing people, and particularly people who would have no other place to get that sort of assistance. That was always really paramount. And the idea, too, that there would be students who'd come and he'd talk, and they'd talk about their experience or whatever. And I'd laugh sometimes because I would hear him say something which I had heard myself from him, or they'd be talking about, oh, I don't like this, oh, I don't like that, la, 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 la. And he'd say, okay, yeah, well, that's fine. But if you're going to tell me about the problem, don't be one of these people who just only talks about the problem. Be someone who comes up with a solution, because now you'll be helpful. You'll be helpful to yourself, and you'll be helpful to everybody else too. And he was very much that way. So he would take people in and he'd listen to, but that was always in his mind, okay, move them so that they can become people who don't just see the problem, but they see how to create solutions. Because back to what we were talking about before, where we are now is a big problem. But if you stay focused on the problem and how bad the problem is and how wrong the problem is and all that, not that all of that isn't all true, but that takes away from where you also have to go, which is find the solution. So I think that was in the field that you guys are in architecture, you're always having to find the solutions to things, right? Mm-hmm. And really important things, because if you don't design something well, we're all paying the price of it afterwards. Yeah. So I think he understood the gravity of what the field requires and the sacrifices that it requires. And so that was going to take people of character to be able to weather that load. And that was really, I think, part of his whole focus in developing people was skills and character. And it starts with students.
I think what's beautiful about this conversation is not only did we get to learn about Eugene, we were able to learn about the history of NOMA and actually be able to share that with people, especially over the podcast. And that is part of the reason we wanted to have this conversation as well. And I thank you all for being here. We are going to wrap up the episode soon with this last question. And I think that NOMA will just continue to grow. And it's become a family to many people, like you've said. It's become this community of architects who, even though we go by the name minority, we just found each other and we just help each other grow. So when you see younger people, especially in NOMA, what is your hope for the future?
Well, I think it should continue growing, of course, the way it has been. But one of my concerns is because it has the word minority, I don't know what that's going to do in terms of females. And it's not that I don't want females to be a part of the group, but I don't know what we can do to keep the figures equal. And because, you see, females have not been admitted in other school departments of architecture, I just think we're going to lose.
It's definitely something that we struggle with, but I think even as we move forward, and I'm sitting up here jokingly thinking about the word minority, and then the fact that as a collective in this room, we're actually the majority globally. So even if the name changes, the National Organization of Majority Architects, I mean, that would be something that really speaks to it. But I think at the same time, if you don't understand your history, you're bound to repeat the same mistakes. So understand the history of this organization was started because black male architects and women not long after did not have a place to really thrive, be a collective, and really focus on the issues that affected them as business owners, as practitioners. It's like, this is a fact in this country. As the black population goes successfully, everybody benefits. When we don't succeed or are not allowed to succeed, everybody gets hurt. And Wendell was a perfect example of that because of the ethnic breakdown of his office. I mean, if you think about it like this, it's 14% of this country's population are black, or identify as black. So it's not like we're gonna hire every single black student that graduates from our architecture program. It's good to give them a place to land, but there's still opportunities for other folks to come in, understand the mission, understand the focus, and still be able to thrive. So I think the answer to your dilemma and what we're talking about really has to remain focused on how we got here. Because I think if you change it in any way, then we're bound to lose it. And that's not something we really want to take a risk on. So I'm excited. I mean, we're about to have our 6th black female president for NOMA in a year and a half or 2 years. So, I mean, that is, again, taking strides because for the first 15, 20 years, there were none. And you had Cheryl and Roberta. And a few years after that, you had Kathy Dixon. And then after Kathy, you had Kimberly Dowdell. And then following Kim and Jason, then you had Pascal. And now you got Sandra Little coming out of Detroit. So I think we're going to be fine. I just think that we have to focus on, as we continue to grow, to not lose in that family focus, which when you come to our conference, you can't help but feel like you're at a family reunion. You know, it's like, oh, this is the cookout, and you're welcome here. Every now and then there might be a little hiccup, but I mean, for the most part, if you're here, then you're here. It's completely up to you to either get in and flow, or maybe this ain't for you. But we're not going to turn you away, because at the same time, there's strength in numbers, but we do better. I mean, if you think about the most interesting aspect and the way that my firm is structured right now, my second practice, Beehive, is it's a black-owned firm, but we have a Chinese partner. And that was the same structure, Campbell to Campbell. So Campbell to Campbell wasn't Campbell T-O, it was Campbell T-I-U, Campbell. And so myself, my partner Dion Lucas, and Justin Essick. And Justin isn't an architect, but the fact that he's Asian and helps manage the business aspects, I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And we have a diverse group of young ladies that work for us, different backgrounds, different nationalities. And I don't have a problem with that, because I saw how it worked for Wendell. So keep it going.
I think that as NOMA grows, as long as we're able to recognize our legacy and understand the history of the organization, I agree, like, we should be fine. I know that the word minority is starting to grow, and there's a lot of more people who are starting to enter NOMA, but in a way, I just feel like it's mainly about balance, and again, just making sure that the history just ends up being very preserved so that everybody can understand where this all started and keep maintaining the values that NOMA has.
It's interesting, we're kind of ending on this point, because it's come full circle, but not in a reductive manner. I mean, you're definitely in a much different place, but that core element, it's kind of like, I think what people miss sometimes in these conversations about meritocracy and all of that, that's supposed to be the reason why DEI is a bad thing. And what I've found interesting, and I don't really know of any other organizations like NOMA, I think it's very unique in that you're together because you do have a shared experience. The ways in which that experience may be slightly different depending upon whether you're black or whether you're a white woman or whether you're Asian or whether you're this or that. Sure, you may have had different experiences to a certain degree, but there's also a very shared experience compared to the AIA population and what they typically experience. So that's real. And pretending that that doesn't exist is just fiction. But the misnomer, I think, in a lot of this is also that people don't always appreciate that you're together because you love architecture or the general field of, obviously, architecture itself has grown, right? So it encompasses so much more than what it did at the beginning. But the skill that you have to have, there's the meritocracy in there, because no one in NOMA is saying, do a half-assed job. No one in NOMA, everything about NOMA is trying to make people the best practitioners that they can be. And then along the way, yes, there's also this other added element that is totally inclusive that people could learn from, because that, when you talk about the majority, that is the world. That's the tent right there. And other things that you guys are having to kind of like work through in this new time frame, as you have different elements of the membership coming together, the world could learn from that, because you are making it work. It gets a little messy. Families are messy. Mm-hmm. But, you don't abandon them just because people are messy. Sometimes you work through it because, at the end of the day, you do have a shared mission. You have a shared focus. And that focus continues to grow. And as your base grows, then the resources that you can have to put towards that development and those people who are coming up grow also. And I think that's what you're starting to experience now, so that your conferences, when you meet, they are very different than how they used to be. And you're the beneficiary of that, your generation and what comes after you. So I think it's an exciting time, provided that, like you said, people can remember the mission and not get distracted by the politics. Yeah. Not within the family. And NOMA's a family. I mean, that's kind of how I always saw my father see it, is that, NOMA was like his second family.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a very good note to end off on. And I really enjoyed this episode. It was very different than what we do. And I think that's what makes it special. And I'm really glad that we're able to have this conversation, especially because this podcast started as an extension of NOMAS. It started as a way where we could interview other architects of color around Chicago and understand their story, their path, and their journey into architecture. And so it's a very special moment for all of us. And this episode completes 2 years of this podcast. So I'm glad that it's grown a lot. And it's such an honor to be able to have a conversation with all of you. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having my mother.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I want to thank everyone who's listening. We release our episodes monthly. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform. You can also follow us on Instagram at beyondthesurface_NOMAS IIT. I want to thank our producer, Kayla Kwok, and the NOMAS IIT team for making this podcast possible. Thank you for listening to this episode of Beyond the Surface with June Campbell and special guests Leslie Campbell and Bryan Hudson. Until next time, goodbye.